Hello everyone, I am Allison.
I'm Victor.
And I'm Sam, and today we'll be doing our presentation on the use of Comsol for studying concussive injuries in the brain.
The goal of this project was to reduce the frequency and severity of concussions in athletes by exploring the effects of helmets on traumatic brain injuries. In order to do so, we needed to create a Comsol model for the brain, skull, and helmet. Furthermore, to simulate an impact, we held the skull and helmet fixed while giving the brain an initial velocity, therefore causing the contra-coup injury characteristic of concussions. Our ultimate goal with this project was to design a better helmet for the future.
Concussions are vitally important to consider because their consequences can be lifelong. Unfortunately, helmets do not reduce the effects of heavy impact enough, and athletes are often saddled with both high short-term healthcare costs and often long-term healthcare costs for the remainder of their lives.
In modeling the head, we had to consider four potential components: the brain itself, the cerebrospinal fluid, the skull, and possible intermediate tissues like the pia and dura mater. We then had to decide which material model would be most appropriate: hyperelastic, viscoelastic, or even hybrid. Then we had to decide on how to model the helmet, which we also separate into three layers: a hard outer shell, an intermediate layer of foam padding, and an inner layer of foam padding. For these layers, we decided a solid isotropic model would be most accurate.
Ultimately, we decided to use a nearly incompressible linear model for the skull, a viscoelastic model with a time-dependent shear modulus for the brain, and a Kelvin-Voigt viscoelastic model for the cerebrospinal fluid because the Kelvin model is best suited for more fluid-like materials like the CSF. The material properties we chose for these models are shown here.
For the helmet, we decided on a polycarbonate outer shell, a polyethylene intermediate foam layer, and a vinyl nitrile inner foam layer because vinyl nitrile is the softest foam commonly used in helmets and would absorb the most energy.
We simplify the geometry of the head by using a series of concentric ellipses to model the brain, CSF, and skull. Similarly, the helmet is composed of three concentric ellipses.
Here is an animation of the total displacement of the brain up to 90 milliseconds after impact. You can clearly see the brain rebounding from the posterior to the anterior sides of the brain, as well as ripples traveling through the brain from the collision. There's also a clear decay of movement, which is coincidental with energy absorption by the system.
Although the displacement was the greatest at the center of the brain, the strain and therefore stored energy density is greatest in both the frontal and occipital lobes, which is consistent with the contusion in the frontal and occipital lobes as a result of the coup-contra-coup motion of the brain during impact. This elastic strain energy is ultimately what causes damage due to the brain not being purely elastic material and deforming plastically.
Kinetic energy density, as expected, is greatest at the center of the brain, since it is this kinetic energy that is being converted into stored energy, so the two are out of phase.
The von Mises stresses in the head are dominated by those in the high modulus skull, which carries the most stress due to stress shielding. Isolating the von Mises stress in just the brain, we can see that the stress is concentrated along the edges where the brain makes contact with the skull.
3-domain probes were used in our study to measure the maximum von Mises stress, the stored energy, and the kinetic energy of the brain during impact. Here, in a model with no helmet, we clearly see a dampening effect with both the stress and total energy of the system decreasing, which suggests that the energy is being dissipated and lost. This result is a testament to the natural dampening of the brain CSF skull system.
On addition of a helmet, significantly less energy is transferred to the brain, as shown by the low stored energy in red. This suggests that most of the energy is being dissipated in the helmet rather than the brain, which is obviously the desired outcome when a helmet is included.
The elastic strain or stored energy density shown here confirms that the energy is being transferred not to the brain but to the helmet, specifically the vinyl nitrile foam. The absorption of energy resulting in damage to the helmet rather than the brain is the desired outcome. Comsol, unfortunately, is unable to model the helmet breaking, which would be expected after absorbing 90% of the impact energy. So, for future studies, finding a program that could better model material failure could improve the accuracy of this study.
Here we see the propagation of shear stresses in the brain, which is not a major concern in the case of concussive injuries. However, the shear stress can cause shearing of axons from neurons.
Thank you for your time.
Bye!
Thank you.
Bye!